Well, hello, and welcome to my diagnosis series. In this particular segment, I'm going to be discussing the assessment of parenting. That's a critical assessment in the family courts that everybody's worried about, documenting the parenting of each of the parents. Well, in this segment, I'm going to discuss how that's done in professional psychology. Beginning with the foundations of behavioral psychology, applied behavioral analysis. Now, it's deeply concerning that I have to educate forensic psychologists about applied behavioral analysis. However, that's necessary currently in the family courts. This is a basic principle of behavioral psychology and should be known by every psychologist working in the family courts. Um, Essentially, the approach of an applied behavioral analysis is to dissect or take apart the behavioral sequences and as well as interpersonal relationships and those exchanges in a step-by-step systematic way. So we start by identifying an incident. And so in the family courts, I would typically start with probably two of the top problematic incidents that are reported. Why don't you want to be with the targeted parent and the child? And the other parent will typically describe two or three incidents. And so, with each one of those incidents, we would take each one and do an applied behavioral analysis where we would look at that, whatever that event was, before, during, and after the event, and look at what everybody is thinking, feeling, and doing. So typically that's the chart that we would use for an applied behavioral analysis, and we just fill in all the little boxes with information as we would systematically go through the event. And the type of interviewing that is done with an applied behavioral analysis, it's called a behavior chain interview. And this is based on, again, B.F. Skinner and basics of behavioral psychology of the stimulus and response. There's a stimulus, a cue, a trigger, and then a response to that. And what the behavior chain looks at is it looks at each one of those, the stimulus, the response, and the response then becomes the next stimulus, and that creates a new response. And so you can see on that little chains, those are three links to the chain. We look at the child in that situation. The parent behavior would be the stimulus. And so the parent says, it's time to turn off your video games. We need to go to the supermarket. That's the stimulus. The child's given a directive. The child's response then becomes, no, I don't want to go. I just want to continue to play on my video game. Now we have the stimulus response. That response of the child that just wants to stay on the video games becomes the stimulus for the parent. And the parent then responds, no, if you don't get off your video games, you're going to lose your video games for a week. That's the parent's response. That threat by the parent to take away the video games then becomes the stimulus for the child's next response, which is to escalate or have a tantrum or to turn off the video games or something. And so what applied behavioral analysis does is it looks at that, that sequence on a behavior chain interview, looking at each person, what were they thinking, feeling, and doing at each step of that process. And in terms of technical descriptions, the stimulus is called the cue, and the response is the consequence. And what we're looking for in behavioral psychology is what is the cue? What is the trigger for the behavior? Because that's going to be the location of our intervention. Whatever is triggering the behavior, we're going to change that so that whatever the context or situation is, it's not triggering the problem behavior that we want to get rid of. So we're going to establish what the cues are that are producing, and then the consequences are the various rewards and punishments that take place that will increase or decrease the frequency of a behavior. Now, an important construct in behavioral psychology and in applied behavioral analysis is called stimulus control. And this is based on a fundamental premise of behavioral psychology, behavior understanding, behavior therapy. Behavior is controlled by the cue, not the consequence. Okay. Let me emphasize that because it was emphasized to me when I learned it. Behavior is controlled by the cue, not the consequence. So people try to do parenting by adjusting rewards and punishments. Wrong location. That's the consequence. You want to be upfront. What's triggering the child's behavior? And then we change that trigger on the child's behavior. So from that perspective, and one way to describe it, and the way it's typically described in coursework, is the traffic situation. The traffic lights control our driving behavior. The traffic lights are the cue, the stimulus that controls our driving behavior. So in this example, you see an example of stimulus control. The driver in the green car sees the green light and says, I get to go. The driver in the red car sees the red light and says, I get to stop. Their driving behavior is being controlled by the stimulus of the traffic light. This is when there's no stimulus control. The green driver is under the stimulus control of the traffic light. The red driver is not. And so they just blow right through the red traffic light and wind up in the consequence of the action. Now, we do want to avoid the consequences. Okay, so consequences do play a role in our behavior. The reason we attend to the traffic light is we don't want to get into a car accident. However, when we approach a traffic light, we don't think, am I going to get in an accident? We look at the traffic light, and it's the traffic light that then controls our behavior. That's the stimulus control. Our behavior is controlled by the cue, not the consequence. Now, when there is no stimulus control, you can change the traffic light to whatever color you want. You can make it blue or purple or magenta, whatever color you want. It doesn't matter because the behavior is not under the control of the stimulus. So in this case, in the family courts, the situation, we're looking at the child's behavior and we're wondering, is the child's behavior authentic to the parent? And so the parent is cueing the child's behavior and the child's responding to the parent? Or is it a false, factitious attachment pathology? So the child's behavior is not actually under the stimulus control of the parent. So we can get the parent to do whatever. It doesn't matter what the parent does. The child's still going to reject that parent because the child's behavior is not being cued by that relationship. It's being cued by loyalty things in the other relationship. And so that's what we're looking for. Is this an authentic or inauthentic pathology, behavior from the child? So we're going to break it down step by step and figure out what the cue structure is for the behavior sequence. Now, this would be a response to intervention. And this is what we can do sometimes to verify our diagnosis. If we change the cue, if we do something, an intervention, and the behavior remains the same, then the behavior is not under the stimulus control of the cue. Okay. So one of the things to assess parenting in the family courts is you ask the child what the problem is with the targeted parent. They will give you some reasons, some things to change. Then you ask the targeted parent to change those. And so they change that, and you should see a corresponding change in the child. But you don't. The child says, oh, no, they're being fake, or they're this, or that. And so it doesn't matter what the targeted parent does. The child is going to reject them no matter what. We could change the parent's behavior till the cows come home. It won't matter because the child's behavior is not under the stimulus control of the targeted parent's behavior. It is being under the stimulus control. It's being cued by features of the relationship with the allied parent. Okay. So from an applied behavioral analysis and behavior chain interview, what that looks like is you would start before the event. Okay, so you start by just talking with everybody. You know, you can do this either together or separately. I'll talk about that in a second. But if I'm doing it with both people together, I'll say, I'll take one person, the one who initiated the problem. Typically, it's the parent by asking some directive or giving the child some task or limit. And so I'll ask the parent, what was going on before that? What were you guys doing? Well, I was in the kitchen. Where was the child? They were in the other room playing video games. Okay. What were you thinking as you were in the kitchen? Well, we need to get out and get some dinner, and I have to go. Okay, so you're thinking about that. And what were you feeling? Feeling okay, and a little anxious about what we're going to have for dinner. And, okay, and so what'd you do? Well, then I walked in the other room and told the child to turn off the video games and get ready because we're going to the supermarket. Okay, so you start before the event and move it into the actual triggering event. And you want to get as specific as possible because that improves memory. And so you want to ask me, so you're in the kitchen. So what were you doing in the kitchen? Well, I was, chopping vegetables. Okay. And was anybody else around? And, you just try to get as specific as possible. What vegetables were you cutting? Which knife were you using? And because all of that will help with specificity. Then you move into the event. And so, what were you feeling? Where was the other person? Then what happened next? What did you think? What did you feel? And what did you do in response? Then what happened next? What did you think? What did you feel? What did you do in response? What happened next? And so it's just this moving back and forth between the two participants in the exchange. So I'd start with the parent and say, what was going on ahead of time? So you're thinking about going to the store and getting that. So what did you do? I went in and told the child to, turn off the video games. Then I turn to the child and say, okay, so parent comes in. Did that what happened? And they say, yeah, parent, he told me to get off the video game. I said, okay, so what were you thinking at that point? It was unfair. And what were you feeling? I was really angry. And so what did you do? I said, no, I don't want to turn off my video games. Okay. I said, okay. Mom, is that what happened? And she said, well, yeah, basically, except he called me a bunch of names too. And I said, you call her a bunch of names? Well, yeah. Okay. So he calls her a bunch of names, says he's not getting off the. And so now what were you thinking? Well, I have to get dinner. And what were you feeling? I was feeling frustrated. What were you? So what did you do? I told him if he doesn't get off the video games, I'm going to take him away. Okay. So is that what happened? She told you that she's going to take him away? Yeah. She's going to take him away for a week. Okay. So what were you thinking? Oh, that's unfair. And boom, 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 boom. I move back and forth between two of them and get them to sort of verify a shared reality of what took place. And when you're in the family courts, you can do this applied behavioral analysis either in a joint interview or in separate interviews. I recommend joint interviews. I can do it in separate ones, but there's a little bit of a problem with that. So if I'm doing a joint interview, though, by interviewing both people together, it allows them to modify each other's perspective and presentation of the incident when the other person is present and also reporting. So in like that little example I was making up, when the child says, I told her I didn't want to turn off my video games, I check with the mom and says, is that what happened? She says, well, yeah, but he verbally abused me too. He called me all these names. Well, if I'm just interviewing the child, The child's going to present that they were a totally innocent victim. And oh my goodness, I was doing nothing wrong. And my parent was just came in screaming and yelling to me to get off the video games and right at this minute. But if I have both of them together and the child says that, and I say, Mom, is that what happened? She goes, no, I gave him 10 minutes. I said, in 10 minutes, you're going to have to get. I said, is that what happened? Well, yeah. Okay, so were you screaming at him? No, I yelled at him later, when he refused to do it and he's calling me all these names. So later but you didn't come in yelling. Did she yell at you right at start? Well, no. Okay. So when I get both of them together, I can get that verification from each other. Now, sometimes they're just discrepant, and they'll say, did she yell at you? And he says, yeah, she was screaming. And did you yell? No, I was totally calm. Okay, now I have like different realities, which gives us useful information about what's going on, that these two people, a parent and a child, don't even share the same reality about what took place. Okay, so that's concerning because typically most people are in the same general vicinity. Even my oppositional defiant and ADHD kids are in the vicinity of a shared reality. They may externalize things, they may blame other people, but we have the sequence of events typically is reported the same. But in the family courts, we can get wild discrepancies. So that's one nice aspect of getting both of them together, is to deal with any discrepancies in reporting between the two of them. When you do a separate interviews for the applied behavioral analysis, you will obtain one person's perspective and reporting, but you're going to need to do a second applied behavioral analysis with the second person to get the full information from each party, and then you may wind up with discrepant information. And that's, if you do this separate, but if you get them both together, you may be able to work out what actually took place. And so in my recommended assessment protocol, I have 6 sessions I kind of recommend that people do, just as a basic structure. The first session would be with the allied parent to get all the reporting about what those concerns are. The second session would be with the targeted parent to get answers to what those concerns are, and to get symptom reporting for the child. The third session would be with an older child, typically, to get reporting from the child about what their concerns are. And then the fourth session would be a joint session with the targeted parent and a child. And that's where I would be doing a joint applied behavioral analysis about the 2 or 3 of the major incidents. So in the first session, the parent would report some incidents. I'd be doing applied behavioral analysis regarding those, potentially. And then when the child raises their issues, when I meet individually with the child, I'm going to pull out the top 2 or 3 incidents. And then when we get together, targeted parent and child, we're going to do an applied behavioral analysis. So what happened? What happened? What happened? What were you thinking, feeling, doing? What were you thinking, feeling, doing? Moving back and forth. Now, even in those first initial sessions with the mom and the dad, or dad and mom, however they work out in alliance and target, I will be doing applied behavioral analysis when we get to incidents. So what took place? What took place? What took place? Now, I won't be doing formally, as I will later on, but behavior chain interviews, looking at thoughts, they pop them in. You just look a little chain whenever it's useful. So from this assessment, applied behavioral analysis, looking at the cue structure. So now I know whether or not I have stimulus control, what the cues and consequences are all involved. What I'm actually additionally looking for with a parenting assessment is the type of strategies used by the parent. And that's my concern, is that we're going to be into abusive range parenting. So I want to document for the court and for the conflict, what exactly are the strategies the parent is using. Then I can put those on a behavior treatment plan and change them if they are problematic. And there's basically just a set of strategies. Either the pretty much complete set of parenting strategies. You can put other down below, but this pretty much captures it. First, there's a positive reinforcement. That's things like star charts and labeled praise. There's guidance-based strategies involving negotiation and scaffolding the child's development. Timeout, and room restrictions are a strategy for dealing with problem behavior at times. Transitional warnings to help the child who's having regulation problems make transitions effectively. Response costs, that's when we take things away from the child, take away their toys and privileges. There's a cost if they continue to respond that way, or threatening to take away toys and privileges if they don't do what we want. Physical discipline, spanking, stress positions, those sorts of things. Anger communication or anger venting, and we want to know the frequency. If they're venting anger, we want to get information on how often that is, and what that looks like. Moral instruction, that's guilt induction, shame, as a parenting technique. And then some parents just simply surrender authority to the child, and the child is in charge. And so those, we want to know, what strategies does the targeted parent use? If you're doing an assessment for the allied parents, you can do that as well, but we're focused on the targeted parent because that's where our abuse concerns are. So of these parenting strategies, the behavior parent training emphasizes positive reinforcement, star charts, and labeled praise, timeout, room restrictions, transitional warnings, and response costs, taking away toys and privileges. So that's your basic curriculum for behavior training component. Developmentally appropriate practices, which is basically 0 to 5, recommends guidance, negotiation, and scaffolding, guidance-based strategies. And 0 to 5, developmentally appropriate practice, does not use discipline strategies very much. This doesn't agree with a lot of the behavioral approaches. The discipline strategies would be considered positive reinforcement, star charts, labeled praise. That's to get your positive behavior, but that's within the scope of discipline. Timeout, room restrictions for misbehavior. Response costs, taking away things. Anything that's designed to decrease a problem is going to be a punishment strategy used in discipline. Physical discipline, spanking, stress positions, and anger communication and venting. So those are all your discipline strategies. The most common discipline strategies are timeout and response costs, taking things away. And the concerning discipline strategies are physical disciplines, spanking and stress positions, and anger venting. Not necessarily anger communication, but anger venting is of concern. And when the two of those are used together, we got anger and physical discipline. Clinical concerns are elevated. Then for the breach and repair sequence, just to note, anger communication is actually within the guidance strategies of negotiation and scaffolding having to do with the breach and repair. And so if you're going to do parenting assessment, it's kind of critical to know the breach and repair sequence, and that would refer over to Tronick and Gold, The Power of Discord, and all the research on the still face, that we blend in a shared psychological state, okay, and intimacy. And then there's an empathic failure that results in a breach. Then we do communication and relationship moves and repair the breach. Then there'll be another empathic failure. And this is both normal and healthy. Okay. 70% of normal and healthy parent-child relationships are out of sync. 70% are out of sync. Only 30% are in sync, because that breach and repair is a healthy process. What we want to avoid is a breach that fails to repair, or no breach that remains enmeshed. So here we have disengaged, here we have enmeshed. We want this intimacy and boundaries. So that's a breach and repair. And anger is part of that. What happens is there's empathic failure that's a little bit painful in this shared psychological state. You'll get a breach. What then the anger will appear to because it's painful and create that full breach. So now we have a nice complete breach because of a little pop of anger. We want to keep anger down. We want to keep anger in the communication system that you're annoying me rather than in the venting system of just emotional venting and things. That's the problem, anger, is the venting one. Letting somebody know you're annoyed, letting a child know you're annoyed when you're annoyed is acceptable, okay, and within guidance-based strategies, and it's healthy. So let's run down each one of these strategies now, just to describe what they are. Positive reinforcement is use of star charts, token economies they're called, or labeled praise. Praise is nice. It's nice to hear good things about yourself, but people tend to discount it most often. Unless you identify, it's helpful to identify what it is. Wow, you did really good on your homework, or yeah, wow, I really like the way you cleaned up your room here. Give them something that anchors a praise rather than just, oh, you're such a wonderful child. The issue around positive reinforcement as a parenting strategy is that it's coercive. You have something the child wants, some toy, some privilege or something, and so you're making that available if they meet your needs. So it's coercive, and it's of limited value. It really doesn't alter much about it's it's sort of bribing the child. I got something you want. If you do what I want, I'll give it to you. It works in that case, but it doesn't actually create the necessary responsibility or character changes that we're hoping for. It's useful as a treatment intervention to improve parent self-awareness, to get them thinking about praising their child and the positive aspects of their child. So I will put this on a behavior or treatment plan if I want the parent to start attending to the child's positive rather than all the negative stuff the child does. And it's also useful for just general communication, to be pleasant to people, let them know what they're doing well, especially children, and creates a positive atmosphere in the home environment. So there's wonderful things that happen with it, but as a behavior change strategy, it's got its problems. The identifying the parenting strategies as guidance-based strategies involve negotiation and scaffolding, and not a whole lot of psychologists know guidance-based strategies. Most are based or understand behavioral parent training, but guidance-based strategies out of early childhood are immensely helpful and healthy. And it's what I would recommend as a parenting approach. I think we can cut discipline-based strategies way, way down to almost nothing and rely more fully on guidance-based strategies. They're developmentally supported. They're healthy for child development. They involve the breach and repair sequence. So it's an understanding for the importance of that and how to navigate that. And a critical question in guidance-based strategies is, what is the intention that's organizing the parents responding? So, and then it's an understanding that behavior, the child's behavior, is a communication. So what we're looking for on developmentally appropriate practice is, what is a child communicating with their behavior? Yes, it's annoying. Yes, it's a protest behavior. What problem is the child trying to overcome or struggling with that's creating the emotional dysregulation or the behavioral dysregulation? What's the problem the child is facing? And so it approaches their behavior as if it has communicative value. And when we do that, we actually give it communicative value, and we bring the child into communicating their emotions rather than just these displays. So what's the intention of the parent in coming, or is an intent to task? You just need to do your homework. I don't care what you feel. intent to understand the child's perspective from the child's world? Is it a intent to just be with the child? Rub, pat, pat. I just like hanging out with you. Or is it an intent to change? I don't like what you're doing. You need to be different because that's a problem, what you're doing. So you look at the parent's intent. The timeouts, room restrictions, very commonly used, especially with young children. Older children get room restrictions. It's a problematic parenting strategy because of the social rejection involved, and it can escalate conflict, especially in fragile children. So actually, I don't recommend timeout as much either. If you're going to restrict a child away, stay with the child. There's a whole belief within behavioral psychology that parents are rewarding their child with this negative attention. Don't worry about that. Okay, the child is not a rat. It's not like rewards and punishment in a Skinner box. There's all sorts of relationship features going on. And so you can put the child on a chair or in the room to communicate that wasn't okay, but that's the extent of it. You're communicating that what they were doing was problematic, and you don't need to reject them. You don't need to turn and walk away. You can kind of hang out in the area. Now, if the child's over and tantruming and all sorts of stuff, well, then your timeout is not going to be the thing you want to use. You want to go in more for scaffolding and other more active interventions for a clearly distressed child. But I can talk about that and treatment of parenting issues. So the transitional warnings, they're recommended within the parent behavioral training, and they're useful for every child who has regulatory problems like ADHD, autism spectrum thing. So as you're assessing the parenting, you're going through applied behavioral analysis, you want to check and see if the parent gave, transitional warnings. And these transitional warnings can be integrated either with a discipline approach or a guidance-based approach. So as I would start the applied behavioral analysis, I said, what did you do? I went in and told the child to get off the computer. Now, did you give the child any warning, or did you just go in and tell them? So I would probe and ask and see if they used, if I asked the child, do they ever warn you about this stuff, or do they just come in to tell you directly? And see if transitional warnings are used. If they're not, then I'd recommend them. They're always a pleasant and nice thing to do for people. Let them know what's coming. Response costs, taking away toys and privileges or threatening to take them away. This is probably the most commonly used parenting strategies, and it is one of the most problematic. It's the one I would recommend getting rid of for all parents. Stop using this one. It's severely problematic. Can you get your child to do what you want by threatening to take away their stuff? Yes, you can. That's possible. However, it's going to have a lot of negative side effects. Let me talk about that for a second, too. Any punishment strategy, and all the punishment strategies, will have negative side effects. Okay, that's timeout, response cost, yelling, anger, physical discipline, anything that's designed to decrease a behavior by making it the child uncomfortable, the punishment strategies is going to have negative side effects. And so we don't necessarily want those or use those. We do need structure at times. There's reasons for the discipline and dominant submission networks, but we want to use them as little as possible. So one of the features about the response cost is it escalates conflict. So you threaten to take something away, and then the kid, you're threatening to take away what they most enjoy or love in the world. Holy cow, you're kind of a mean person, and they get pretty upset that you're being so mean to them. And that creates a negative parent-child relationship when you use this strategy. And it fosters parental threats seeking to coerce the child's behavior. Because if you found something the child likes, so you can threaten to take it away, I'm going to take your car keys away from you, then it's going to create this situation where if you take the car keys away, then what are you going to do next? The child says, well, I get to do whatever I want now. And well, you can't threaten to take it away again. So you don't want to actually take it away as a parent. What you want is the threat of taking it away to motivate the child, which leads to the situation where parents are continually threatening to take stuff away and they don't follow through, because the moment they follow through and take away the toy or the privilege, they lose their power that the threat of taking that away gives to them. So it just creates a nasty dynamic in the family of parents constantly threatening their children to take away what the child most loves. And it's what the child most loves, because if not, it has no effectiveness with insufficiently valued things. So you say, I'm going to take your board game away. And the child says, I don't care. I never play board games. Well, then I'm going to take your, Legos away. Well, I play Legos in 5 years. Well, I'm going to take it. So it has to be something the child enjoys and wants. Okay. I'm going to take your, dessert away. Well, don't take my dessert. Okay. And so, but you're always looking for what the child most loves in this world so that you can threaten to take it away to control them, which makes you a bad person, kind of a mean person as a parent. So I do not recommend response cost as a strategy. There's other things we can do. Physical discipline, spanking and stress positions, it's highly problematic. It's not recommended. However, it's often a cultural value. I grew up in a society and culture where we got swats at school from paddles. So it's a shifting value system within our society. But I do not recommend physical discipline. If present as a parenting strategy, the treatment should focus on moving to alternative strategies. There's other things we can do than physically hitting a child. Anger communication or venting. If that's a symptom feature, you really want to know the frequency of that and then what that looks like. So I get angry. Okay, tell me what that looks like. Ask the child to tell you what that looks like. Are they screaming? Are they yelling? Are they throwing things? What does angry look like? And how often does it occur? Now, mild anger, as I noted earlier, is a communication, and it can be brought into the communication networks. You're annoyed because children are annoying. The protest behavior is supposed to annoy us. It's what makes it protest behavior to get us involved. And so that's entirely within the scope of guidance-based strategies in the breach and repair sequence. What we're worried about is anger venting by a parent, and as a discipline strategy of punishment and child coercion through intimidation. And anger should never be combined with physical discipline. So the anger, when a parent is angry, that's self-indulgent. Okay, they've lost control and they're just venting the emotion, and they're using it as a sort of an emotional bludgeon to punish the child. So next time the child is going to say, I don't want to do that. My parent's going to get really angry. Now, does that kind of work? Yeah, people say, I don't want to do that because, holy cow, my mom or dad's going to get really angry and I don't want to hear it. But it's a brutal way to discipline. And I would not recommend anger venting as a discipline strategy. Communication, annoyance, you bring it in, but now you're dealing with breach and repair, and you're dealing with an intent to understand and some negotiation rather than just the venting of anger. Lecturing is another parenting strategy in teaching natural consequences. So you help facilitate the child's understanding for the natural consequences that resulted from their behavior. This can be mildly aversive for the child by inflicting intense boredom as the parent lectures them about some problematic aspect of what they did. But lecturing can also be incorporated into learning from a natural consequences parenting approach, which is excellent to help the child understand and link their behavior to what the response of the world was. And so helping them understand that. An intent to understand works better, as does negotiation with the child. So rather than lecturing the child, a little bit better approach, because lectures go in one way, is to come in and anticipate the child will self-discover the right things. And so you come in with an intent to understand. So what was going on? Did you think about this? What were your thoughts about that? And you help the child make the connections through your eyes of the other. That's called your intent to understand. And then negotiate with any sort of difficulties. See what flexibility you can provide and what flexibility the child can provide. That's a useful social skill to have children develop. Moral instruction, guilt induction, and shame. The moral emotions are shame, embarrassment, and guilt, and they are extremely painful and are not recommended as a parenting strategy, especially within the discipline. Its communication system, communicating a little sense of shame or guilt kind of thing, is socially, it's a social influence approach. Okay, can be used. And mild moral signaling can be incorporated into communication within a guidance-based approach. However, moral suasion should be avoided as a discipline approach to suppress child behavior. It's more when you want to use morality, right and wrong, as an influence, a parenting influence. What you want to do is you want to live the right and wrong, and then you will just resonate. As a child does something, you will resonate. That wasn't right, and the child will go, "Yeah, I know that wasn't right." And so it's more of a shared morality rather than using shame or embarrassment as a discipline approach. And then the prominent feature of this is that cultural values can prominently influence the reliance on moral suasion as a parenting strategy. Some cultures, it's very important to have that sense of social cohesion. So surrendering parental authority to the child, that just would indicate the parent has no strategy for dealing with the child, is overwhelmed, and we need to get them some parenting skills instruction. It's possible when you see this that we're looking at unresolved trauma in the family of origin for the parent, which is affecting their current parenting. So we want to find out what sort of parenting beliefs this incapable parent holds, that's guiding their parenting strategy. In the family courts, there's two aspects of our parenting assessment that are important. The first is it's an abuse assessment. With family court conflict, the clinical concern is abusive parenting by one parent or the other. And if a child's rejecting a parent, then our first concern is that it's abusive parenting by the targeted parent. So that becomes our first rule-out diagnosis. Our rule-out diagnosis in custody conflict is the possible child abuse by the targeted rejected parent. So that's why we want to conduct a parenting assessment of their parenting using applied behavioral analysis and behavior chain interviewing so that we can rule in or rule out abusive parenting by the targeted parent. The second aspect of assessing parenting in a court context is the court will want documentation support from the assessment for its decision making. So that's why I recommend using the parenting practices rating scale. I put it together from my knowledge of parenting and parenting practices rating scale, and the clinician provides a clinical rating based on their parenting assessment of the parenting practices of the targeted parent. Level 1 and level 2 on that scale are abusive range parenting. Levels 3 and 4 are normal range parenting. So you just put a checkbox in wherever you think their parenting is, and that clearly documents for the court and for everybody involved what you think is going on. And so this is up on my website, the Parenting Practices Rating Scale. And again, it's based on the assessment of parenting. It's a clinical judgment. So you do applied behavioral analysis and then rate the parenting using the scale. And there's 4 levels. Level 1 is abusive range parenting, clearly abusive. Level 2 is highly problematic, not quite abusive, but significantly problematic. Level 3 is normal range problematic. And parents are not perfect. There's things they can improve, but it's broadly normal range parenting. But there's a couple of things we might want to improve on. And then level 4 is normal, healthy parenting. And then you give examples for each of the ratings, and that's important. So you give your rating of, the parent is over too disengaged. They're not involved enough with the child. Then you give a couple of examples from the clinical interviews that support that rating. And so then that information can get to the court. The court can look at it and see if they're level 1, 2, 3, or 4. It can go to the mental health professionals. If somebody's rated a 3, level 2 somewhere, level 2 parenting, and they disagree, they can challenge it and say that's not an example of level 3. That's level 2 or level 1, and so it just provides a clarity that's necessary for the court's understanding and for decision making around court-involved custody conflict. So I recommend the parent-child relationship rating scale gets completed at all assessments of court-involved children. It's easy. Just tell us what the parenting is, and it's not a definitive measure. It's just documenting what you're found when you did the parenting assessment, so everybody knows. Now, it's important to understand when talking about parenting that cultural influences will be profound. With cultural influences with the mental health professional and with the parents and family and within the family. So their cultural influences will be profound, and the potential for cultural bias will be immense. And so everything needs to be clear and clearly documented and supported. In the absence of child abuse, parents have the right to parent according to their cultural values, their personal values, and their religious values. And personal values covers a lot. In the absence of child abuse, each parent should have as much time and involvement with the child as possible. And in the absence of child abuse, to restrict either parent's time and involvement with the child will damage the child's attachment bond to that parent, thereby harming the child and harming the parent. So if there's no child abuse, clinical psychology has no opinion. Okay, we can put various concerns on a treatment plan to fix them, but if there's no child abuse, parents have the right to parent to their personal, cultural, and religious values. The question for clinical psychology, for the doctors, is there child abuse? And when a child's rejecting a parent, yes, there is. Either it's authentic child abuse by the targeted parent, in which case we need to document what that is and put it on a treatment plan, fix it, or it's a false attachment pathology caused by a shared persecutory delusion, a factitious attachment pathology imposed on the child for secondary gain to the pathological parent. That's child psychological abuse, just creating a delusional thought disorder that destroys the child's attachment bond to the other parent is psychological child abuse. So one way or the other, when I have a child rejecting a parent, that symptom is caused by child abuse. So in all cases of that symptom, we should be getting a child abuse diagnosis returned. We're not from the forensic psychologist, which has me immensely concerned because that's the only thing that causes a symptom, but they're not diagnosing child abuse, then they're misdiagnosing child abuse and failing in their duty to protect, one way or the other. So that's a problem. So the question for doctors, for the clinical psychologist, there is no quasi-judicial role for doctors. Doctors diagnose and treat pathology. The quasi-judicial role of forensic custody evaluator is deciding who deserves to be a parent based on arbitrary criteria needs to end. The forensic custody evaluations need to be entirely eliminated. They lack scientific and legal value, harmful to children, and are dangerous. So they need to stop, and we need to go back to clinical diagnostic assessments. Doctors need to be doctors. Is there child abuse? Most likely, if you got child rejecting a parent, the question for the court's concern is which parent is abusing the child, and what are we going to do about it? What's the treatment for that? And so that's the information that the court needs, and the court needs it clearly documented and supported, not a personal opinion. So apply behavioral analysis, work it out, get the samples, document where the parenting is on the parenting practices rating scale, and then everybody knows what's going on, and we can get clarity for the treatment plan. So with that, that ends my seminar on assessing parenting in the family courts.